Hello, my name is Joshua, and I'd like to talk about a topic that I covered in a previous video on why I don't think other animals suffer as the human animal does. And I realized that I should treat this first as the philosophical argument that I have rather than trying to flush it out from the empirical vantage point that I'm trying to, because it is a relatively complicated matter that has a lot to do with how I'm defining things and thinking of things. So, first and foremost, I'd like to start with some analogies in order to make it clear to people what I mean by um, I'm just gonna say human consciousness, or what it means for humans to be conscious. And I'm gonna do this through the use of an analogy. And so, everybody has dreamt at some point in time in their lives, and I hope everybody remembers enough of their dreams to know kind of what the quality of yourself is in a dream. In a dream, you are what I would describe as a subject. And a subject is really a collection of emotions, motivations, instincts, and drives. And so, motivations, instincts, and drives are not all the same thing, nor are emotions, but they're all very intimately connected to one another from what I can understand. That may, and so I'm not going to flush why that is the case out, why that is the case right now, but having said that, I think that when you're in a dream, so let's think about using a dream to think about the features of a subject. When you're in a dream, unless you're committing lucid dreaming, which means that somehow you can consciously manipulate what's going on and understanding the subjective experience in a dream, you, in most instances and scenarios, while you're dreaming, you are just something in the space of the dream, and you have no awareness of any spaces or persons outside of the dream and the dreamscape. Whatever narrative is relevant to that dreamscape, those are the only thoughts you're permitted to have, and those are the only things that you have somewhat of a limited awareness of. And maybe you do have certain instances where you think you cannot run as fast in this dream as you normally can, but you don't think of it in the dream situation as something going on in the dream, but there being something wrong with you, the subject in the dream. Why can't I not run that fast? At least this is something that is the case with me. I don't know if this is the case with other people, so this may be a poor analogy, but I think every person probably has a set of dreams and experiences that they're just there. They participate in them. They're just living out some kind of drama and narrative, which they have some role in, but they have no real awareness of themselves and their roles in the dream drama from a broader contextual standpoint, meaning that whenever you're, not to be crude or something like that, slicing up your little brother. I didn't have this dream, so don't first think that this is me. I'm just making this up based on a cartoon I saw. But whenever you're having the dream that you're slicing up your little brother on a laboratory table, you don't have the thought or the memory come up of you two playing in the backyard yesterday, laughing and having a good time. That just doesn't seem to enter into the dream. Your dream also doesn't seem to know that your brother is in the next county over, spending the night at his friends. So if you were able to start thinking about context that existed outside of the dreamscape, it would seem ludicrous to you what's actually happening in the dream itself. Sometimes dreams do map over to our desires and things we would want to see in our lived experience, but oftentimes they don't. And so the reason why dreams have a certain sense of lunacy to them, to ourselves in our waking state, or why they have a religious significance or a certain kind of mythical characteristic to them, is because the dream's contextual landscape is completely devoid of any greater contextual landscape that's not local to it. And so that is what it means to be a subject. How you are in a dream is how I think animals are in the world. So whenever you think of a deer does experience fear. They do experience all of the emotions that human beings experience. However, a deer does not know why it's afraid, and it doesn't really care why it's afraid either. It's not even necessarily being aware of its fear. So I'm gonna get more into what I mean. So it doesn't know why it's afraid. It doesn't even care why it's afraid. It just knows that it's afraid and it responds to its fear. It doesn't have any different kind of fear, or maybe it has varying degrees of fear, based on it encountering a bear versus a person. But person or bear be damned, that deer knows, need to hightail it out of here. And it's going to generally do that, most neurotypical deer. So they're going to generally do that under most cases and scenarios, like under normative cases. If you were just to encounter a deer in the wild, and you were just to look at deers in their throughout their normative experiences, they see something that looks bigger or taller than them, they think predator. Or if they see there are certain things that if they see them, they think predator, they're out of there. They just don't stick around to find out the rest of the story. Human beings are different, obviously, but that is what I mean for something to be a subject. You know that deer do have emotions, instincts, drives, and motivations that script their behavior in the world, and they have a sense, they have a pleasure pain mechanism working in them, and they have a sense from the standpoint of a subject of what it means to experience pleasure or pain. And so in that way, they're a subject. And I think at bottom, that's all people are. I don't think that we're different from them in those ways. It's just that's not all that's true about human beings, and here's why. Human consciousness or consciousness, not just cognition, but consciousness itself, is a bloody freaking mystery, because nobody really knows what it means for human beings to be an object to themselves. So the clear distinction between human beings as animals and other animals has something to do with our capacity for language and theory of mind, and our associative memory. But what else is going on, I really don't know. But it's the case that it seems that several features of our cognition in conjunction with our prefrontal cortex have a confluence of a certain sort that permeates our experiences. And what I mean is this: it's why Buddhists came up with the concept of ego, because whenever you're in the world experiencing things in the world, you are experiencing what you're currently experiencing, and sometimes your experiences can make you lose awareness of yourself. But you have to lose awareness of yourself, because babies, they don't have awareness of themselves. They can't. So that's the only thing. In fact, that's the only thing that they know is their subjective experience. They're a subject. It takes a series of maturation in order for them to realize that they, as a subject, are an object in space. And so it's why it's why physics actually emerges from the human mind in the first place, because our relational whatever deal, I don't know really why it's there. So I've just been thinking about these things recently, and so I don't really know what to say that it necessarily is, but it makes a lot of sense to me from the standpoint of human intellectual enterprises in terms of why we choose to describe things and the way in which we choose to describe things, because something about our cognition thinks of ourselves as objects in space, our subject as an object in space. Maybe not literally, but with respects to people around us and the topographical landscape that we're a part of. And you may say, well, damn, Joshua, I mean, like, other animals know whether or not they're close to a tree or not. Yes, other animals know whether or not they're close to a tree or not, but other animals don't know that they're not standing next to Paris Hilton or something like that. So the fact that we have identity and that identity acts as something of an objective operational agent in our minds that influences our emotion and our emotional wherewithal, it's like you got a completely different sort of creature walking around as a human being than when you're dealing with other animals. And I mean, I'm not saying human beings aren't animals. We are animals. It's just we're a very interesting sort of animal. And that's partly why I'm not exactly a fan of certain things, because I think that the real big mystery in terms of science is the human. What the hell does it mean to be human? Like, what is the human animal? Because we are certainly an animal, but we're like no goddamn animal that exists on the planet in certain ways. And I think that that's not a good thing. That has positive things for us and terrible consequences for us. So I think because human beings are subjects that have an objective understanding of their subject in the world, and I don't mean objective from the standpoint of the concept of objectivity in philosophy, but I mean object as in identity. People know who they are. Your dog actually doesn't know who it is or what it is. So it knows what it is through an experiential standpoint, and it knows another dog when it sees it. But your dog, even if it knows its name, it knows a certain set of phonetic sounds that are organized by a set of experiences and feedback loops that tell it what's going on in the world. But the minute your dog encounters another dog, it throws, unless it's well trained, it throws all the little connective relational rules you two have between one another to the wayside, because at bottom it's just a subject in the world. It doesn't care. And so, human beings aren't like that, because human beings understand themselves as being related to subjects as objects in the world relatively at infinitum. It's why we can be religious, or why we have the idea of being in a relationship with a god. No other animal would come up with something like that, because no other animal can be conscious of their subject in the world. At least not to anything that we've like discovered. It doesn't seem that there's a good case for it. There is a good case that there's a limited sort of self-awareness that other primates and some other animals are capable of, but this awareness does not promote the same kind of understanding of geography. So the fact that we're objects, we can think of ourselves as objects of subject in the world, leads to many of our different intellectual enterprises, everything from geography to whatever you want to name it. It's because we can think of person A here and myself there that we have the concept of distance in the first place. You can generalize it all, at least I think you can generalize it all to points, and then you have a really sophisticated abstract notion of everything, but it's all centered around language, theory of mind, associative memory, and a lot of other things. It's a complicated little network or constellation of things, but the what it means for human beings to be in the world is more than experience. However, what it means for animals to be in the world is experience. There, because experience is brought way, whether or not you're talking about an animal or a human being, by way of the physiological makeup of organisms. Now, I'd put it like this, that human beings share that as well. It's just that there's also something going on with our cognition that differentiated us, and nobody really knows what or why. So it's like, I'm not telling you that it's a solid grasp or understanding of something, but I'd say from a purely philosophical um, context that the reason why I don't believe other animals can suffer is because I don't believe other animals have an objective understanding of their subjective experience in the world. So no animal can think right now Tammy is sad. Even if Tammy is the person or something like that, they don't think that. They have a certain set and we have a certain set of instincts and emotions that drive us to recognize Tammy's sorrow or something like that. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that that's not true. That's absolutely the case. Like, it's only because we are humans that we pay attention to what we pay attention to in the first place. But there is something else that's funny about human beings, that we have an understanding of our subject and other subjects in the world across time and history. That's a very strange thing. It's not something you should just take for granted as a given. It's not something that seems to be um, uh, ubiquitous across the natural landscape. Emotions and subjective experience seems to be relatively ubiquitous across the natural landscape until you get to about shrimp, and then it seems to fall off. Who knows really what's going on with shrimp? But you go lower than shrimp and things like that. Who knows what's going on? But it's the case that either way, doesn't matter. It's just the case that um, uh, you also have to understand that human beings, they have the capacity to think of subjects as objects in the world. So that's a whole different can of worms. And I say that that's abstraction, and I know why people balk at my use of that word. So I don't really know what to call that, and so I'm just going to call it human consciousness for now, but it's something that's fundamentally and utterly different than what's going on with other animals, such that it's why we're a real threat to the environment and the ecosystem, because nobody would have guessed what the consequences were of some animal being able to understand themselves as an object in the world, and thus being able to understand other things as objects in the world would be. But here we are in modernity, and it's all just because human consciousness is a lot different than animal consciousness. There are many similarities, or animal existence, consciousness. I don't really know what to call it, man. I'm just gonna say, because I think animals are conscious to a certain degree and things like that. I would describe it in terms of degrees of freedom. I'd say in terms of the degrees of freedom of consciousness, human beings have the maximal degree of freedom that of any animal that has been witnessed on this goddamn planet ever. And so I would say that's true. Whenever it comes to so yeah, and so I guess that's just the way that I'd phrase it. We are unique. We're a very, 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 very unique animal, and I think that that's why to attribute suffering to other animals is wrong, because suffering is unique to human beings. It doesn't mean that other animals don't experience pain or mourning or something like that, but and I'd also pose the question like this: if you think that other animals can commit rape or be raped, then you believe they suffer. If you don't believe that they can commit rape or that they can be raped by them and their species or something like that. So if you look at a baboon and you think that given that baboon and their instincts and their motivations and so on and so forth, whatever's true for their cognition, whenever they go up to that other baboon and they copulate with that other baboon against their will, if you think that that's rape, then you think that that other baboon is suffering. The baboon that's being, if you think that that's rape, then you believe in animal suffering. If you don't think that's rape, then you don't believe in animal suffering. Because the reason why human beings rape and the reason why human beings can be raped is because human beings can understand other people as subjects in the world, as other objects opposite themselves with their own subjective experience in the world. And we assume that that subjective experience in the world within other people is valuable or is something worth being cognizant of in our interaction with one another, because we value our own subject because we can be aware of ourselves as subjects in space in the world with relation to other people. And so that's why we're like that. It's also why we have morality. And that's why other animals don't. Because animals don't have the same kind of consciousness. All other animals don't have the same kind of consciousness that the human animal does. And so to say that they suffer is a very gross misunderstanding of human existence that I don't particularly care for. And so, yeah, that's on human human consciousness. And then I'm going to do a video specifically on what suffering is. And I've already alluded to some of what I'm going to use in that video to talk about why I think only humans suffer and what suffering actually is for human beings, and why it is a result of a subject and their experience, but it doesn't come down to subjective experience completely. Okay, so that's my video, and thank you for watching.